So, uh, you touch upon, in terms of mobilization, you touch upon in your book, or it's one of the major points, is how in the elections emotions were mobilized as well, or used. Could you give an example of that?
No, this state, the political mobilization one after Mr. Modi took over was completely different from the pre-Modi era of 2014. This he brought in a very intimate discourse. Much of policy making, much of political discourse was as if Modi is directly communicating to. So I have in fact refer to it as an intimate state. He does this talk series, the radio talk series that is called as Man Ki Baat, which broadly translate in English as the heartfelt talk, one-to-one talk, which he delivers every month, where he gets into very personal, intimate, private issues like how to take exams, how should kids face stress before they take exams, how should you face health problems, how should you face interpersonal issues, things of this kind, very routine, banal issues of everyday kind. They broke that distinction between the personal, private, and the public. All that was in the personal, private domain, all your personal emotions, they were all very skillfully mobilized by the current regime. So I, in fact, refer that the strength of the current regime's mobilizational techniques is that both they made an ethical pitch and they make an emotional pitch, which I think was missing. In the secular constitutional kind of mobilization, it's very impersonal. It is based on agenda, it is based on ideology, it is based on meta issues. But here was a government which broke it down in terms of nationalism, in terms of religion, in terms of family, in terms of community, in terms of neighborhood, and in terms of your individual well-being. So that's a big shift.
So it's, if I understood it correctly, it's somewhat of a radio show that Moody gives?
Yes, a radio talk show that he gives every month. I mean, that's one example because you wanted an example.
Yes.
But
Yes.
but he does it every day, almost on everyday basis. He appeals to you directly. Every major policy, you might have heard of, India went through the demonetization policy where the notes were cancelled out, legitimate currency. Even that he announced at midnight, 12 p.m. And he comes late night. Then he addresses people on a one-to-one basis, and he says there is this crisis. In order to fight the corruption now, I'm cancelling, nullifying these legal tender notes, and there is a process of demonetization announced. So there is this kind of a very direct, almost one-to-one communication that he manages with people, and he does that communication in very lay language, in very everyday language. There are no big political expressions. There are no policy framework that he uses, things of that kind.
You say before him there was a phase where that really wasn't the case. When I think back, when you think back, were there other examples of that? Because I'm thinking of, I'm obviously not an expert, but I'm thinking of, for example, Gandhi. He was not the prime minister or whatsoever, but he was a political figure, and he seemed to be really close to the people as well.
True, you're absolutely right. So the good examples that we have of this is Gandhi. In fact, in my book, I argue that a lot of these mass communication techniques, the master of symbolism, they actually picked a lot of clues from Gandhi's mobilization. Gandhi was a master in generating mass symbolism. So India being so culturally diverse, linguistically it is so diverse, literacy rates are pretty low. There is mass poverty, even now the official figures, we have 40 to 30% below poverty line. So how do you communicate to people who are so diverse, who are so socially differentiated? Gandhi was such a genius that, how do you mobilize such people against colonialism? You have heard of the Salt March. What Gandhi did during anti-colonial movement was said that the Britishers taxing your salt meant that you lose your autonomy. So he linked eating salt to the question of sovereignty, eating salt to the question of nationalism. That was the Gandhian genius. So salt is something everybody consumes. So cutting across castes, classes, regions, rural, urban. So it immediately caught people's attention. It, in a very concrete way defined what is it to fight the colonial power. I think Narendra Modi also succeeds partially in demonstrating and generating that kind of symbolism. He generates metaphors and symbolism which is very close to your heart. So like religious symbols, he does religious rituals in public domain. He communicates a lot of political stuff through religious mantras, religious slogans, through reference to religious texts sometimes. So all this generates immense trust and it appeals to latent emotions. It also appeals to civilizational ethics between what is right and wrong, what is good and evil. So he succeeds in projecting himself as the epitome of goodness, of being ethical, as against all his opponents, who then he succeeds in demonstrating them as being evil, corrupt, and anti-national.
So if it's for a good cause, I think you can maybe make an argument that that is a good thing. But usually I would say, isn't it better if people were given the opportunity to make rational, informed decisions rather than emotional ones?
Well, that reminds me of what Karl Marx once said about rationality. He said rationality is necessary, but reason is not always reasonable. So, even, reason and rationality do not necessarily occupy people's imagination. Reason and rationality has that inbuilt impersonal, objective character to itself, which you have to have certain kind of a detachment from your own self, to have that kind of a rational frame. Which doesn't mean that emotions are not based in reason or rationality. Emotions then are much more in terms of this intensity it generates. So therefore, rationality can project representation, but emotions give you identification. You identify so completely with your leader. It's like a faith-based practice, which has its own spiritual, emotional fulfillment, which you do not have in a legal, rational discourse. This is very fulfilling emotionally. It gives you a deep sense of psychological satisfaction. It gives you a deep sense of emotional security. And post-neoliberalism, with the kind of global urbanization we have, people are pretty lonely, alienated, insecure, with massive anxieties. In that kind of a post-Westphalian urban context, these kinds of methods work pretty strongly, because it's almost like Mr. Modi is like a paternal figure who is looking after you. So people now trust. They said whatever goes wrong, even if things are going downward, people say that Modi will take care of it. No, we don't have to worry. So it's almost like such a deep trust, which is not an easy thing for a political leader to generate, especially in a country like India with such diversity.
But still, I would argue that I understand the point. But if just because someone appeals to my philosophical or idealistic ideas of a good person, and he represents maybe a good family image, etc., doesn't necessarily mean that he knows how to best govern for economic policy, for example.